Welcome to Lord Nightmare channel. We share scary stories with rainy ambience. I hope this video helps you in some way to sleep, relax, or just be entertained for a while. If you enjoy it, please think about subscribing and hitting the thumbs up button to help my channel out. Now let's begin. This story takes place when I was around 16 or 17 years old. I lived with just my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was the type of place you wouldn't want to be out in after the sun goes down. Up until about 10 or 11 p.m., there would be a cop or two patrolling the area and making sure there was no gang activity. I worked at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride or an hour-and-a-half train ride. The train station was just a couple of blocks from my place, and since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, the train was my main form of transportation. I'd start work around 3 p.m. and usually get home around 12 or 1 a.m. This was my schedule 4 days a week aside from school. I saw a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really spoke to each other. Until one night when I got out of work late because some people decided to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train. The next one wouldn't arrive for another hour. So with nowhere to go and no money for Lyft or Uber, I sat and waited. There was no one around, so when this older man showed up, kind of staggering, I assumed he was just another drunken person trying to catch a train to sleep somewhere. Something about his face felt familiar, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I'd seen him on the train before. He made his way over to me, which made me uncomfortable, and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring his words, but the way he was looking at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out so late all by myself. I had to answer so I didn't anger him. I mean, we were alone and he was close enough that he could have pulled out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him I was waiting for the train, and he asked which one. The trains were color-coded with a strip at the top to indicate whether they went north, south, east, or west. I took the blue train, but I lied and said I took the green one. He looked at the schedule above the benches and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said he'd keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked me how long I had been working at so-and-so restaurant. This made my blood run cold. I never told him where I worked. I looked at him and very timidly said, "A year," and he laughed. He said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point my skin was crawling with anxiety. As soon as the green train arrived, I knew I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye and thanked him for the chat, hoping that would be the end of it. But no. He suddenly told me that he took the green train too, so he followed me on and sat behind me. My mind was racing, wondering if he was going to try to do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me in some other way. We rode the train in silence. There weren't many people on the train at that hour, and our car was empty. As the ride went on in tense silence, I could feel them staring at the back of my head. I waited until we reached a stop with another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train, and the man followed me just as I expected. I took a seat on a bench next to hers, close enough for her to see and hear everything, hoping she'd catch on. The man noticed that I was sniffling, probably from allergies and the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had, claiming they were cold medicine. I declined, saying loudly, "Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers." This made the woman look at us and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. This went on until the blue train arrived, and the lady got up giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without any explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you go sit over there," and made him sit a few seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us and stared at me the entire time. I was shaking, about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what had happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she introduced him to me as Ray. Ray was filled in on everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised me I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile widely like the Cheshire Cat. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug, thanking her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help. It chills me to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met that woman and her friend. I feel incredibly lucky to this day. I never saw that man again and eventually stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my mind, that creepy, aroused smile of his is still burned into my memory. I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. So, where I live, public transportation is pretty bad. There's only one unreliable public bus that goes in and out of the residential area, and it's a long walk. So the people in my neighborhood came up with a cab-like system where you pay by the seat. These cabs fit up to 4 people, and about a year ago they started identifying these cabs with a sticker that shows the cab line number. The drivers also have ID cards that list the cab line info. Now, on to the story. A couple of times men have tried to give me a ride. I do my best to ignore them, but sometimes it's a little scary. The part of the residential area where I live is isolated, so not a lot of cars or people pass through. I have to walk alone from my house to the cab line or bus stop. A couple of months ago I was walking to the stop while wearing headphones, so I wasn't paying much attention. That was my first mistake. A car pulled up next to me, which wasn't too strange because I've been using the cab line for a while and many of the drivers know me. They often pull over when they see me, so I don't have to walk all the way to the stop. The driver asked, "Hey, are you going to such and such place?" I said yes and got inside without checking the windshield for the ID number. That was my second mistake. This is when alarms started going off in my head. The cars in the cab line are usually old and don't have AC, but this was a newer car. When I got in, the driver locked the doors and turned on the AC. That's when I realized that this wasn't one of the cabs, it was a stranger. He started asking personal questions like my name and where I lived. I answered very vaguely with my heart racing. I was starting to panic, so I texted a friend my location and told him to call me as soon as possible. At this point we were close to my destination, but the driver didn't slow down and was about to pass the stop. Then my friend called and I answered, pretending he was my boyfriend. I said, "Hi baby, I'm almost there, wait for me and we'll go, okay?" My friend was confused, but when the man heard me talking, he suddenly stopped the car He said, "Sorry, I was so entertained talking to you that I almost missed the stop. Maybe we could see each other again." Then he unlocked the doors and I bolted out of the car, barely saying anything. After that, I became much more aware of my surroundings. I only get into cabs at the stop if I can clearly see ID on the car. A couple of friends said I was overreacting, but that situation scared me a lot. Then today, I was walking to the stop without headphones, and halfway there a car started driving slowly next to me. I kept walking, but the older man driving the car started talking to me. He asked, "Are you Alicia's daughter? Do you live around here?" I said no, I'm not, and kept walking. He insisted that he was a neighbor and could give me a ride. I said again that I wasn't and that I didn't want a ride. Just to clarify, my mom wasn't called that and she's been dead for over a decade. The grandma people sometimes confuse with my mom isn't called that either. The man kept insisting, and I started walking faster toward the stop where there were more people. At this point, the man got angry and started yelling, saying that this was the last time he would be nice and offer me a ride. Then he sped off. I finally got to the stop and got in a cab that took me to my destination. When I got to work, I told my boss and she said, "Thank God you kept walking. You could have been kidnapped." So that was my morning. I could really use a car. To both of those creeps who might have wanted to kidnap me, or who knows what else, let's not meet. This incident happened when I was nearly 12. I had already started developing early on, so I would already get unwanted attention from adult males. At the time, I never understood why, and I only wore shirts under my clothes instead of actual training bras. So they weren't that visible, though you could still kind of see them. The area I lived in at the time wasn't the best, but due to my mother being a single parent and having only one source of income, this is where I called home. It was a seemingly presentable-looking apartment complex on the outside, though the residents who lived there knew it was anything but. We lived in there a total of 3 years due to the rising incidents that happened to us, and we were forced to move. When we first moved into the area, though, crime wasn't the problem. Not to mention there were a lot of children in the complex, so I thought nothing bad would happen here, because it's a family place. It's a complex that's safe. Having this state of mind, I would usually go outside to sit on our front porch during the summers to play with my dog when I got bored in the house. Where I lived, it gets extremely hot during this time, so I had a tank top and shorts. It was around 5:30, and it seemed to be completely still outside. It seemed as though no one was out, and it was just me and my puppy. Now, he was extremely protective and very alert, but sadly I wasn't. As I was wrestling with him, I hear a tussle in the bushes about 10 feet away from me to the right, but I pay it no mind and continue to play with him, though now my puppy seems very tense. About 5 minutes later, I hear it again, and so does he, but this time he loses his playful spirit and goes into full-on guard mode, ears perked, chest pointed out, and eyes scanning. Now please understand something. I was always a very timid child. If I heard anything, I damn sure wasn't gonna go investigate it. My mother was upstairs asleep since she worked nights, and due to this I didn't want to bother her, though she didn't know I was outside anyway. I see no matter how much I tried to get him to keep playing, he just won't budge. I turn to where he's looking and I see a man, very rough looking, but I knew I'd seen him before. He must have lived in the complex. He had a dirty wife beater that looked stained, dark blue jeans and work boots. He was standing behind a bush next to the building looking at me. I saw his hand moving rapidly at the time and had no idea what he was doing. I now know what he was doing behind that bush. All the while, he was muttering something under his breath and tried to take a step closer to me. But Instead of me running, I was frozen. My dog at that point let out the most vicious growl and snarled at the man, which snapped me out of my frozen state. Immediately I screamed for my mother, running up the stairs as quickly as I could. When I got upstairs, she heard me and quickly rushed to me. Though I didn't want her worrying, she had work that night, so I brushed it off with some excuse and sent her back to bed. I thought this was over. Wrong again. Fast forward to about 3 days later, and my feeble mind had forgotten about the incident, but I didn't go back outside alone. It was nighttime now, and me and my mom came back from our mummy-daughter days at the movie. It was 12:30. We had just gotten home. Me, being hyped up on cotton candy and sodas, was off my guard again, though my mother was not. I always joke with her about how, even now, she has the hearing of a dog. I didn't even know it would come in handy tonight. One thing about my mother is that she isn't very threatening, standing at only 5'5", though she has lots of muscle in her from working on the ambulance as an EMT. Another thing is, regardless of where she was, she always has a switchblade that she could pop out faster than anything if she needed to. As we shut the car off, we noticed that the street light illuminating our building was off. We both looked at each other in a WTF realization. It was pitch black now, and every other light was on in front of the building but ours. Me being scared, this knocked my hyper feelings I had aside. I wasn't attentive. As I was getting out the car, I noticed that I heard a rustle behind the bush, like I had heard a few days prior. I stopped dead in my tracks outside of the car and looked at my mother without speaking, asking her, "Did you hear that?" through only my eyes. She didn't miss a beat. Her eyes were already trained on the bushes to our right. Deciding to play it cool like we didn't hear them, we continued to get our bags out the car. As we shut them, it seemed time stood still. The pathway for us to get to our building was Y-shaped, and the realization hit that this person was 5 feet away, dressed in all black with a hoodie and hands in his pockets. I could feel the ill intent meant for us. As we got to the front of our car, I looked at her and she looked at me, knowing this meant that we run on the count of 3. By now my heart was beating out of my chest, and on 3 I'd booked it to the front door and threw it open quickly, running up our steps, keys in hand. Though as I ran with my mother, behind me I could hear a third pair of feet were running too. I had cleared 5 feet between me and the door, and about 20 steps in 10 seconds with my mother in tow. Since our door to the building was incredibly hard to open once slammed, she shut it tightly behind her, waking up my sleeping dog in the process, and he began barking like crazy. I could hear the door handle jiggling, trying to be forced open, and as me and my mother finally stepped into our apartment, we heard the building door slam open and the footsteps running up, though by this time the door was locked and barricaded. The dog growled and jumped at the door, and in hearing this, I think scared whoever was there away, because all that was heard was retreating footsteps out of the building and around the side of the building into a very thick brush. We called the police, who said that there was nothing they could do about it. I even told my mom finally of the man I saw, and she knew who it was. Let's just say I had to stop her from popping a cap in his ass and getting locked up, since the police told us to mind our business and get used to it. And I quote his words, "Women should be in the house anyway." So rude and sexist. I hope that sicko is in jail now or rotting somewhere.